welcome to episode 161 of Cinematary. I'm your host, Zach Dennis, and I am here with
Lydia Creech,
Nathan Smith,
and Andrew Swafford.
And in today's episode, we will be talking about movies we saw this week in part one, and in part two, we will be discussing the age-old question, the one that was inscribed on stone and was taken down from the Mount of God. Is this a film or is this a television show?
I didn't know that God handed down questions now.
God's very inquisitive. He's passed on from being very demands and decrees, and he's just like, I want to see what's up with you guys.
He's like, what if this is all there is?
Yeah. And then we're like, but God, shouldn't you know? And he's like, I don't know. Anyway. But first, before we get into the movies that we saw this week, we wanted to answer some mail, because we like mail.
So
this is from... Oh, go ahead.
Well, I didn't know if you wanted to read it or if I should read it, since it's about me. Do you want me to read it? I have it pulled up right here.
Nathan's so ready.
This is from long-time listener, I think multi-time commenter, David Allen. Shout out to David.
I think Zach should read this. I think Zach should do a dramatic reading, and then Nathan can give his response.
All right.
What was that?
David Allen. This is what he had to. This was on
Facebook.
One of our episodes. This was on Facebook for our episode with a review of Jackass by Nathan. Nathan, who at times indulges in some quite magnificent, pretentious twaddle, scaled new heights with his review of Jackass. I remembered last year when he spoke at length about wrestling, and I couldn't figure out why the rest of the people on the show weren't bursting into fits of giggles. But his Jackass review really did go on, and 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 on. Maybe he should have a fast-forward button of some sort installed, or iPhones could come with a Skip Nathan button for such reviews. Anyway, that's my review of Nathan's review of Jackass.
So I guess
Nathan, do you have anything to say?
My response is that I called up my good longtime friend Tim Cook over in Cupertino, California. And the reason why the iPhone X was announced this week is because he just really had to get that Skip Nathan button out there into the world. I mean, I don't know. I can't speak for the rest of the world, but sometimes I wish I had my own Skip Nathan button.
That's why the iPhone X is $999.
That is the price it pays to not hear my opinions. So, I mean, there is the fast forward button, which I often use on podcasts when there are advertisements that I don't want to hear, So, just think of me like Mark Maron's.
I wonder if David Allen listens on an iPhone.
He did say iPhones. He did specifically say iPhones. So
yeah, I mean, you have your 15-second skip.
If you want to think of me just as like Mark Maron's Adam and Eve ads or the Cinephiliacs movie ads, which actually are really nice ads because they are individual and unique, like my opinions.
Sorry, that was an inappropriate place to laugh.
Wow. Okay.
You can. You can skip me. You cannot skip me. But
I hope that no one skips our little ad blocks in the middle of our show, especially lately, just because we've had new ones every week, and Zach's last week was quite amusing.
That's not a new one. I've done that a couple times.
Womp womp.
Is that not
I've
new?
skipped them before.
I've had a few times. I've gotten pretty good reviews on.
Okay. Dang.
People are fans of my mid episode ad.
Why are people reviewing our ads
yours
and
is my
not our
favorite.
reviews? More reviews of our reviews.
I do think
Please.
this is a good point that there should be more reviews of our reviews.
That's fine. Yeah.
I mean, we ask you to review our reviews on iTunes in every week's episode.
Give me individually ratings, please. Subscribe to just me.
Yes.
Thank you.
Next time you go on iTunes to leave us a review, please review every individual contributor of the show.
Well, on this note, Nathan, you had a movie you want to talk about this week.
Yeah, I actually, just a heads up, David, I have some more pretentious twaddle that might get under your skin, because I'm going to talk about a little motion picture called Sandy Wexler. brought to us by Adam Sandler. I have to look up really quick which one of his cohorts directed this, because he's got the stable of the few guys who do all of his movies.
People direct those?
He just gives his friends jobs that he likes.
Stephen Brill, who also did Little Nicky, Heavyweights Without a Paddle, Mr. Deeds,
the classics.
Drillbit Taylor. So this is the third of Adam Sandler's deal with Netflix. He's been releasing his films directly into the screens and homes of his audience on Netflix. So those who don't like Mr. Sandler and his antics can more easily avoid them.
Hey Nathan, before you get too deep into this, we discussed before we hit record, giving a specific time limit for Mr. Allen, who wants to skip over your review. So I'm going to give you 10 minutes.
Okay.
I'm going to let you know when you have 1 minute left.
That's way too much time.
Well, that's for Sandy Wexler and his other movie.
I think the other movie will be more probably agreeable to the serious movie
like
fan.
Skip the Sandy Wexler, and what's the other movie?
Thunderbolt and Lightfoot.
If you would like to skip Sandy Wexler and Thunderbolt and Lightfoot, this will be exactly 10 minutes.
I don't think you should skip
your time
Thunderbolt
begins.
and Lightfoot, though. You can skip Sandy Wexler. I don't care.
Your time begins now.
Okay, so this film, the name Sandy Wexler obviously is somewhat similar to Adam Sandler's real name, and befitting that title. This is a very Sandy Sandler. I mean,
Wexler, Adam.
Okay, I mean, I don't know. That's when I heard about this. I don't know. That's what kind of came to my mind. Anyway, so this is a very personal film. He plays a sort of kooky, stubborn talent manager in Los Angeles in the 1990s. He represents a daredevil, a ventriloquist played by Kevin James. It has some comparisons I think can be drawn to Woody Allen's Broadway Danny Rose. He's not the most successful person, but he is very loyal and very committed to his clients and considers them his family, because he doesn't really have any family of his own. And one day at an amusement park, he discovers a woman working as a singing swan named Courtney Clark, who's played by the lovely Jennifer Hudson, who is obviously an incredible singer in the actual world. And he decides to pluck her out of obscurity and make her into a star. And
I get it, because she's a swan.
Yeah, there we go. And she very quickly becomes just this massive pop superstar, in a vein kind of similar to Mariah Carey or Whitney Houston. Just has these incredible vocals and does a lot of the classic Mariah Carey vocal run. And as Courtney's fame and status grow, she starts to kind of go her separate ways from Sandy, who she's sort of developed a sort of sweet friendship, but also kind of a budding romance with Sandy. And as she sort of succumbs to the pressures of fame and starts to become really in demand, they split up both romantically and as business partners. And so the film takes place kind of over the course of a decade and is sort of exploring their relationship through its ups and its downs. And the movie is over 2 hours, so I was a little bit nervous going in, but I had heard about sort of the style and some specific moments in this movie that seemed very much up my alley. I mean, it is long, and that may test the patience of many people, especially considering that many people don't like Adam Sandler. Frankly, this was actually the first full, straight-up Adam Sandler movie I had ever seen, and honestly, I really loved it. I think it's a very sweet movie. I mean, Adam Sandler is doing his sort of stock, obnoxious voice, but you kind of take pity on his character, and you root for him. You want him to get with Courtney, and they do get together eventually at the end of the film. Spoilers. I mean, it's a kind of a predictable movie, but they get together in a moment that takes place in Los Angeles's iconic Griffith Observatory, and I really didn't like La La Land, so it was nice to see an actually good movie put that location to kind of nice and nice effect. The thing that really though makes this movie stand out to me is it has a very bizarre sense of humor. There are a lot of just like very morbid and macabre jokes. Like there's a scene where for Sandy Wexler inexplicably, even though he's not really successful, lives in this very wealthy neighborhood, and that's sort of a running gag throughout the film. And he has a neighbor who is this very rich, older. I'm just going to ignore that. This very rich, kind of older housewife, and she seduces him and invites him over, and they're about to start making love, doing the deed. And Sandy looks over and he sees the woman's like dying husband in a vegetative state, like in a hospital bed in the room with them looking on, and he's just like, oh, I gotta get out of here. And it's just this like
Nathan has
really absurd moment that brings to mind one of the best short films of the past few years by Todd Rohal, who did Uncle Kent 2, which I'm a huge fan of, called Rat Pack Rat, about a Sammy Davis Jr. impersonator. And there's also a really dark cameo from Chris Elliott, where he plays a depressed clown who kills himself. And there's this just like insane gag where you only see the back of Chris Elliott's head, and then he goes to hang himself, and you only see his like gigantic clown shoes come down as he hangs himself. And then he's got these puppets who also like hang themselves next to him, and their feet, like their puppet feet, come down. And it's just like very bizarre, very out there. And it's the kind of stuff, I mean, I'm a huge Jerry Lewis fan, and it's the kind of just out there physical comedy that I really eat up. So I don't know. I mean, I know most people don't care for Adam Sandler and would especially not care for a 2+ hour long, what is basically a vanity project. But I think this movie is very personal. I think it's very sweet and romantic in a way that is effective and kind of a classic Hollywood way, but it also is infused with these sort of darker jokes and absurdist tendencies that I really appreciated. So it's a Netflix original movie. It's available on Netflix. If you're willing to give something else a try, I'd recommend watching it. But if you think that everything I say is just pretentious twaddle, then maybe just ignore this. And I
hope that David Allen doesn't think we're mocking him. I was genuinely amused and enjoyed his comments.
I was also genuinely amused, but I can play the heel. I can mess with this guy. It's okay.
I think it was a slightly like poking, sly, like I'm gonna roast you.
Who's saying I'm not?
I think it did its job.
I can roast back. We can go.
Yeah,
tit for tat.
Absolutely. You have 2 minutes and 48 seconds,
I will very
by the
quickly
way.
talk about the more respectable movie that I wanted to talk about this week, which is Michael Cimino's Thunderbolt and Lightfoot from 1974. It stars a very dashing young Jeff Bridges. It stars Clint Eastwood, sort of at the height of his stardom and career. It also has George Kennedy and very briefly a young Gary Busey. So this is about a man who at the beginning of the film you think is a preacher, but you really quickly realize is actually this notorious bank robber named Thunderbolt who broke into an armory using a giant armor-piercing gun. And he's been on the lam for a long time. And he links up with Jeff Bridges, who is named Lightfoot. And he's this sort of rapscallious young man who steals a sports car and is just cracking jokes, having a good time. And so they're out there on the road just living it up, living the life, and they are quickly pursued by George Kennedy's character, who is one of Clint Eastwood's former associates and who thinks that Clint Eastwood stole a lot of money from him, so he's trying to kill him and get that money back. But it's soon revealed that actually Clint Eastwood himself never got the money, that it was hidden away by one of their other partners who is now deceased, and that he's been trying to find it for the last several years to no avail. And so they hatch up a plan to break into this armory again, using the exact same plan that Clint Eastwood used before, just because they assume that because this break-in, this robbery was so high profile that no one would ever dare to use the same exact plan to break into it. So this is a very...
Nathan has 1 minute, by the way.
Okay. This is a very fun, kind of classic road movie. Jeff Bridges and Clint Eastwood have this incredible chemistry. I mean, if you've ever seen the young Jeff Bridges, or even the older Jeff Bridges, I mean, you know, he's just a good time in a bag. Clint Eastwood is a little more serious, a little more stern and silent and mature, but Jeff Bridges is still able to kind of like bring out the fun in Clint Eastwood. So this movie does have this great comic timing. It's just one of those kind of 70s American road movies, but at the same time it has a sort of a sadness to it, and it has a really tragic ending that brings to mind Easy Rider. I mean, this movie was kind of produced in the post Easy Rider sort of road movie craze, and in the same way that Easy Rider is sort of about the end of a certain America, I think this movie is also about the gosh, did you set an alarm for me or something?
Yes,
oh my
I
gosh.
did.
Okay, I'll try
All
to...
right, Nathan.
Let me just wrap this up real quick. So I think this movie is also, I mean, if you're familiar with Michael Cimino, you probably know him from The Deer Hunter or Heaven's Gate, which are very big, epic, serious movies. And this one is a lot lighter in tone, but it does have the same sort of interest and kind of broader themes about American society, about the urbanization and kind of change of the West. At the end of the film, Clint Eastwood and Jeff Bridges stop by this old schoolhouse, which has been moved from the center of a town off to just some random exit on an interstate that nobody goes down. And they stop by this schoolhouse and they're reading sort of the historical plaque for it. And one of the things that it says on there is that this schoolhouse is a vision of a vanished America. And I feel like that's a great way to sum up this movie. It's sort of about, even though it's not really a Western per se, it is kind of in the same way as many Westerns, about sort of the sewing up of a final frontier, of a certain lifestyle where you could almost kind of live this sort of nomadic life in the 20th century in America, going from town to town, doing job to job, sort of living off the grid, off the books, and nobody would really care. I think that's basically impossible now. And I think the movie, whether intentionally or not, is about that. So I don't know. It's, if you like movies like Easy Rider, like Two-Lane Blacktop, it's just that strain of rough and tumble, good time, but not afraid to get serious, new Hollywood movies. Sort of the movies that I think, I mean, Easy Rider, not so much, but a lot of those movies I think are sort of this undercurrent in the new Hollywood movement that often get overlooked. I think this movie is really fun, but also really smart and has something to say at the end of the day. I mean, some of the jokes are maybe a little bit politically incorrect and haven't aged well, and you might cringe here or there, but I also think that it does have a nice heart to it. So Thunderbolt and Lightfoot, I saw it at the Metrograph Theater, but it's widely available on DVD, so get it at your local library or wherever fine movies are distributed. So I'll shut up now.
Lydia, you had a movie you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, that was more than
yes.
10 minutes.
This is one of the few Miyazaki's I haven't seen. I got a chance to watch his very first feature directorial effort, Lupin, the Third, Castle of Cagliostro.
Cagliostro?
Yeah, it's fun to say. I don't know. I was pretty dismissive on my Letterboxd. I wrote like a sentence. It was like, the animation isn't beautiful, and there were too many comedy sound effect noises, like things bouncing and the music going bow, bow. And maybe that's not fair because I know that it's had a pretty big influence on a lot of American animators, and it's been re-released a bunch of times. And actually, Andrew and you, Zach, informed me before we started recording that it's getting a release in a few weeks by G4 or G-Kids.
Yes, G-Kids.
G-Force. It's the hamster movie with Zach Galifianakis.
I was thinking of the gaming
Rest
cable
in peace,
channel
G4.
It's also worth mentioning that the car chase scene early in the movie has been cited by Steven Spielberg as one of his favorite action sequences in movies.
So there's that. And maybe it's not fair to Miyazaki because it is based on a long-running manga series and anime, but it didn't feel like it had those Miyazaki touches, the things that, you know, make us fall in love with Spirited Away or Kiki's Delivery Service, or even the like real environmentalist themes of Nausicaa or Mononoke. Like, it's just an anime action adventure. I think maybe if I had not seen this thinking that it was a Miyazaki film, I would have liked it a lot more.
Isn't it also an OVA of a long-running series on television?
It's the second movie version of this Lupin the Third franchise.
So did you feel like you were going in without enough information, like not having watched the series? Or does it stand on its own?
It stands on its own really well. It's just the problem is it's this very kind of, I'm going to say formulaic, like there's a damsel in distress and, you know, Lupin's kind of a playboy, really adventurer. He's a thief, like a master thief. And you kind of get this sense that he goes like globe trotting, has adventures. It's fine.
I just like how he's a thief. Actually, strike that, master thief.
That sounds like something Fantastic Mr. Fox would say.
I mean, maybe it's that same kind of like character type, you know? Like mischievous, but mostly good heart. I don't know, the action sequence, like that car chase, and there's one where he's running down the roof of a castle, and that actually made my palms sweat a lot. So those were really effective sequences. But I was looking for touches of Miyazaki, and I didn't necessarily get them.
So would you say that this is an essential watch for fans of Miyazaki, or even like completionist Miyazaki fans?
Completionists, definitely, but I think there's a reason it's kind of the last one that I've come to.
It's also this one's not affiliated with Studio Ghibli.
Yeah, the house style, like Studio Ghibli house style, you think of the like big tears and kind of round faces, that's not present. It's like it looks like 80s anime. That's not very specific, but like it's a little bit cheap looking. The movements aren't as fluid. I'm sure John could probably tell us why. Like it was probably animated on 2s and not 1s. And sometimes the color changes, like in like Disney in transition, those like you could tell maybe they were animating on a budget a little bit. But the backgrounds are still really beautiful, and actually there's one shot of like clouds going across a field and the shadow on the ground. I was like, I've definitely seen that in later Miyazaki movies. So like here and there are really good touches. I guess if you like action anime or like adventures, it's fine, it's good. But not necessarily if you're in it for Miyazaki completionism. It's fine.
Okay. Our last one is a new release, and Andrew's written about it for the site. But if you want to do a quick little, drive people to the review, why don't you talk about it?
Yeah. Yes. So don't want to dwell on this too much, but I would like to plug my review for It, the remake, I guess, of the miniseries adaptation of
I don't think it's
Stephen King's book.
I don't think it's I think it's like, I would say it's an adaptation of the book. I'm confused also. I don't know if it's like any way affiliated with the TV thing.
The production and the relationship with its predecessors is confusing. This movie was originally written and supposed to be directed by Cary Fukunaga, who did True Detective, and he kind of wanted to make it his own thing. He wanted to wander from Stephen King's vision a bit, and
Steven loves
the studio wanted. Stephen, he's just such a fan of people wandering from his vision.
Yeah.
The studio wanted to make something, from what I understand, not something just like Stephen King's book, but something more akin to the 90s miniseries, which is why I say it's an adaptation of that. So they fire Cary Fukunaga. They bring in another guy. His name is Andre Muschietti. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly or not. He's an Argentinian filmmaker, I believe. He made the horror film Mama a couple years back, which was kind of discovered and produced and presented by Guillermo del Toro. And there's not a whole lot I want to say about this right now because I went long on this movie for my piece on the site, and I want to make sure people go read that. But basically my short take is that the movie kind of has two different realms that it operates in. It operates in the realm of slice of life, small town Americana, kids hangout movie. You have 7 different kids who are all like 13 years old or so, just, messing with each other, insulting each other's mothers, and hanging out and having a good time, and also being afraid and insecure about all the things that young boys are afraid and insecure about. And then you have the other realm, which is the crazy clown time, to use David Lynch's phrase, where Pennywise, this iconic monster, just continues interrupting the sequences of small town idyllic boy's life. And the horror film elements of this thing, I think, are they create some vivid images that have a. I think I saw somebody on Letterboxd say they have a sense of bigness to them, and I think I agree with that. But I don't think the monster element in this movie necessarily works on any sort of logical level, and I think it undercuts a lot of the strengths of the movie. It really works when it is kind of operating on that human level and letting the kids' chemistry bounce off of one another. And the clown stuff is just like, it's too much, it's too in your face, it's too often, it doesn't quite make any sense, so you don't really have a sense of tension or a sense of dread, and you get annoyed by those parts as the movie goes forward. And so even though it may work as a movie in some ways, it doesn't necessarily work as a horror movie for my taste. Like the genre-y parts of it are a little just lackluster. But I do want people to go read my piece, which is much...
Yeah. And you can find that on cinematary.com. We're going to take a quick break. We will be back discussing films and TV shows after this.
Hello, Cinematary listeners. This is Andrew Swafford with an important message during this break in the show. Cinematary would like you to know that we do not want your money, and we don't want to place ads in the show at this time. That's not why we do this. We do it because we enjoy each other's company and because we want to bring you our pure, unadulterated opinions on the world of cinema. However, there are a few things you can do to help out the show that we would greatly appreciate. Firstly, leave us a review on iTunes, preferably a positive one, because the algorithm gods tell us that reviews increase our podcast exposure. Secondly, send us a tweet at Cinematary, or better yet, send an email to cinematary@yahoo.com so that we can hear from you guys for a change. Maybe you think I'm an idiot for not liking Singing in the Rain, or maybe you have a suggestion of a movie that you really want to hear our opinion on. Regardless, let us know your thoughts, and we'll read them out and respond to them on future episodes of Cinematary. Finally, please share the show with friends and members of your family who you think would enjoy listening to and participating in our film discussions we bring to you guys every week. So to recap, review, send us your thoughts through Twitter and email, and share with your friends and family. We would truly appreciate it. Thanks for listening. Now let's get back to the show.
we are back with part 2 of episode 161 of Cinematary. In this part, we will be challenging films versus TV, and one will leave. Well, 2 will enter, 1 will leave, and that'll be it. That's the end of one medium of entertainment. Andrew, you
Movies may no longer exist after this
we'll
podcast.
just watch TV.
This could be the last episode of Cinematary.
Well, then it'll become television.
A TV podcast?
Cinematary.
Television-tary.
Tivimatary?
The Cinematary
TV
Cemetery.
Anyway, Andrew, you proposed this idea, so I'm going to let you introduce it.
Yes, I sort of introduced this at the end of last week's episode, but again with a little bit more depth and detail. Our topic is, what is a film, or is it a film? And this question really springs out of the recent occurrence of the finale of David Lynch's miniseries / season of Twin Peaks: The Return, which some people consider to be the 3rd season of Twin Peaks. Other people consider it to be its own standalone thing. David Lynch himself has called it an 18-hour movie. However, there have been many prestige television showrunners who have claimed that, my work is really a 25-hour film or something like that. You know, like the showrunners of Game of Thrones have said their thing is a film, and their thing is most definitely not a film. So I wanted to pose this question slightly for selfish reasons, which is that I truly want to put Twin Peaks on my top 10 list at the end of the year. It would be number 1 if I am allowed to do so. But I don't know if in good faith I can do that. So I wanted to propose a couple of questions, give a couple of case studies, and allow us to talk out what our criteria is for what something has to be called a film versus what something has to be to not fit into the category of film. So a couple quick case studies. Firstly, we have Twin Peaks: Return. It has a single director over 18 different episodes. Again, Lynch has called it a film, so his own authorial intent is for us to experience this as a film. However, it has been kind of dripped out to us over the course of 18 weeks, which is not really how you experience a film. But part of it did play at the Cannes Film Festival, which only really shows films. And there is a precedent for Twin Peaks film in Twin Peaks: Fire Walk with Me, and Twin Peaks: Return. The title is formatted in the same way as Twin Peaks: Fire Walk with Me, so you could make the argument that it is just another kind of appendage off of the original series. So that's Twin Peaks: The Return. Last year we had O.J. Made in America, which won an Oscar for Best Documentary. Is it 7 hours, Zach?
7 hours.
7 hours long. It played initially, I believe, on ESPN.
No, it premiered at Sundance, actually.
Oh, it premiered at Sundance as part of one full, uninterrupted 7 hours.
Yeah.
Were there credit sequences in that 7 hours at all?
I have no idea.
Because it's,
I mean, I know it played all together.
The thing has been released on Blu-ray as a TV edition, which I know Zach has a copy of, and it's also been released as a theatrical edition, which I believe does not have 7 different sets of credits. However, the director Ezra Edelman has only really made ESPN 30 for 30 documentaries, which you could have an argument whether or not those are movies or TV. But this thing has been nominated for both, or it has won Oscars and it has been nominated for Emmys, so it's straddling 2 lines. We were talking to our guest Wendy Mays at the end of last week's episode, and she says that she knows somebody who worked on the production of O.J. Made in America, and said the reason they were nominated for Oscars is because they found a way to get played in theaters before the cutoff date for the Oscars came around. Otherwise, they may not have thought of themselves as a movie. Other things that are kind of along the same temporal lines as O.J. Made in America, it's a 7-hour, one unified thing. We have a couple things on Letterboxd that are about the same length and have a single arc to them, but most people tend to categorize as TV. Like Letterboxd has Big Little Lies, which is 7 hours, exactly the same length as O.J. Made in America. Letterboxd has True Detective, same length as O.J. Made in America, the original season of True Detective, of course. Now, Other case studies include like music video films. For example, the music video film to Lemonade by Beyonce Knowles, which had many different directors, a bunch of episodic chunks using different techniques to capture the visual style to coordinate to different songs, but it does have an overall arc. It sort of has an abstract narrative from beginning to end, and the same can be said for Runaway, the film by Hype Williams, directed for Kanye West, which has one single director and more of a unified piece to it as opposed to Lemonade, which is more fragmented. However, when that came out, I don't remember people talking about it as a movie in the same way that people talked about Lemonade as a movie. Lemonade, again, was on our top 10 list at the end of last year. And then I have two more things to consider. One is internet media that has kind of been considered as films, like The Show About the Show, which was a YouTube series by Kaveh Zahidi. It's like 5, I believe, different segments that are 15 or 20 minutes each, all by the same director, of course. It has been compiled into one single unit that is feature length and has been played in theaters. However, there are 4 or 5 different credit sequences that play throughout the course of the quote-unquote film. That is also in my top 10 of the year at this point. And then another thing that is similar to that, some people have considered Horace and Pete by Louis C.K. to be a film. It was put online all at the same time for people to consume at once. And then
No, it wasn't.
Was it not?
No, it was put out week by week.
Okay. I stand corrected on that. My last case study is things that America experiences as films that other countries do not experience as films. For example, the Trip series by Michael Winterbottom. We have The Trip, we have The Trip to Spain, we have The Trip to Italy. Those all came out as multi-episode seasons in the UK that were much, much longer than what we watched in the United States. However, these are considered unequivocally as films in the United States, even though we're not getting the whole story, and they were originally planned as these episodic jaunts. And you could compare this to the way that people have consumed anime in many cases, like the Gundam series. They put out like a 50-episode season 1, and it was about to go off the air until they released it as like 3 separate feature films. And then once people started watching the feature films, interest generated about Gundam, and then they started putting out series again. And ever since then, every season has been compressed into multi-hour films. The same has sort of been done for the show Evangelion, though that is sort of a rehash of the original Evangelion show. But basically it's the same premise, where you're taking a long-form television show and you're finding a way to compress it into a feature length for film-type consumption. Is that the same as a film, or is that something completely different? I don't know. Those are kind of our modern case studies. There's a lot of older things that I think we'll probably get into later, but that's kind of what I wanted to lead off with, things that have come out in the 21st century that people have been talking about in terms of internet culture and writing about films and putting lists together and things like that. And I wanted to ask you guys, like, based on some of these case studies and other things that you were thinking about, what is your criteria for what a film is and what a film is not?
I guess, and this is maybe a really shallow, knee-jerk way to look at it, but I always considered, if I'm going to watch something as a film, it has to actually have a structure that I can consume in one sitting, and I'm not meant to have this start-stop kind of ebb and flow of my attention, because even like Netflix will release a whole series in one go, and so you could conceivably watch it all in one sitting, but each episode will have its own like arc and structure, and then it stops, and it's supposed to stop in a way that like makes you want to watch the next episode, where I would not watch a film that was structured that way. I would turn it off.
Did you watch O.J. Made in America all in one go?
I watched it in 2 sittings because I started it too late, but that felt wrong. That felt like stopping a movie
Okay.
in the middle and going to bed. And I also...
See, I watched it in 7 chunks over the course of many days.
And also, my thought is films are mostly self-contained. I mean, you have series like Harry Potter, whatever. But I swear to God, if there's a season 4 of Twin Peaks, I will not fucking watch it.
And there's the question, too, of, like, is something a movie if it is tethered to a pre-existing property, like Lupin the Third, for example, or even something like Fire Walk with Me. You can't sit down and watch Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me if you have not seen the series. So is it really
I think
a
you
self-contained film? Is a film need to be self-contained?
I think you
I
could.
would have understood Fire Walk with Me if I
think you
didn't
could.
watch all of season 1 and hate watched season 2. But I think as a work of cinema, like just purely talking structure and like cinematic technique, that Fire Walk with Me absolutely kind of stands above television.
I was thinking also about the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which ostensibly all the entries are films, but none of them truly stand alone in that you have to have seen the earlier iterations, and they don't necessarily resolve themselves by the end of the film. They
Are they
allude
being
to
treated? That's
what's that?
like, that's like my structure thing. Like, you get to the end of a Netflix episode of something and it reveals, like at the end of the episode, there's a reveal,
Right,
and like a hook to get you to watch the next one.
Well, something that I knew we were going to do this episode, but an idea that didn't really occur to me until a few days ago, which is not originally my idea. I have to give credit to the episode of Peter Larbuza, my friend Peter Larbuza's podcast, The Cinephiliacs. They just did an episode about Twin Peaks: The Return, and one of the guest commentators on that episode, whose name escapes me right now, he said that really kind of the difference in this whole argument, one of the differences is not, it's not necessarily in the narrative of the show itself. It's institutional, that TV has historically kind of had this open-endedness, not just in the narrative and the structure of individual shows themselves, but in how it's produced. I mean, the difference between Twin Peaks: The Return and the original series is that when David Lynch was doing the pilot, he didn't even know who the killer was. That didn't even occur to him until he was filming the pilot episode. And a lot of the show was kind of created in the process of creation, whereas Twin Peaks: The Return, I mean, I'm sure there are things that, changed in the production and things that maybe he riffed on or whatever, because that always happens. That happens with every movie. But it was a single solid unit. It was produced with a unit.
It was all filmed at the same time, sort of, too?
Yeah, whereas with television, it's always, are we going to get another season? Are we going to get another episode? You never know. And I mean, even though I think season 2 and season 3 of Twin Peaks have similar endings, and that they're these sort of, I mean, you can say, some people might say in terms of narrative, they're cliffhangers. I think they're both emotionally clear, but they are very jarring endings, both of them. But the difference is that in season 2, the show was canceled, and that was not the intended ending. The thing with The Return is that was the intended ending. So I think a lot of the differences between television and cinema are these institutional differences, and we have to look at the institutions and how they're created. But I think one of the things that I want to point out is, I mean, obviously this argument and this debate isn't really new. And, you have like a lot of, the German film industry in the 70s was really indebted to television. And I mean, Rainer Werner Fassbinder worked a lot in TV. You have like the British director Alan Clark, who's been really revered recently and there's been a big push to kind of canonize his work lately. He mostly worked in television, even though those things, a lot of those things maybe approximate the length of feature films. They were produced for television. And I think one of the unique things about cinema is that I really feel like it's kind of the only art form where 100+ years into its existence, we still can't exactly agree on what it is. I mean, we can't even agree on a single word to refer to it. I mean, films, there are a lot of people who have issue with the word film just because it refers to a physical material that often doesn't exist anymore. I mean, the word cinema can also refer to a place. The movies is a weird word too, because we also use it to refer to a place. And And then, I mean, using motion pictures sounds kind of archaic and weird.
Because a GIF is a motion picture.
Yeah, and it's like you have all of these, you have all these other motion pictures from like zoetropes and very early on to now to Vines and GIFs and all these things that are ostensibly moving images and motion pictures, but they're not really movies, and we don't think of them as movies. So I think that even if we can't answer fully this debate, I do think that is one of the interesting things about cinema, is that we have always been asking what exactly it is, and we've never been able to pin down what it is. I mean, we hear a song, we know it's music. We see a painting, for the most part, we know it's a painting. We know what literature is. We know what all the other arts are. I mean, maybe, I don't know, maybe video games or VR complicate these questions, but I feel like cinema is totally unique in that. And I don't know. I honestly, I don't really know for myself. I'll pass the mic back over to you guys in just a second, but I don't really know for myself how I even classify it. I feel like it's honestly like kind of a gut feeling, sort of related to that cloisteredness, the kind of closed, hermetically sealed world of a movie. It's this kind of one experience, even if, you know, I mean, because there are plenty of movies I watch at home that I pause and then I get distracted and then I'm like, oh, wow, I was watching a thing and I got to go back to it now. You know, it's, I still feel like when I think of something as cinema, because like, I mean, right now I have Big Little Lies on my Letterboxd Best of the Year list. Might remove it. I don't know.
I would like to hear your take on that and how you define it as cinema.
I just feel like there's an answer that's maybe more serious where I'm like, this just feels like this unified, cohesive, singular thing.
It does. I completely agree.
And I think there are probably other examples I could think of like that. But at the same time, I have kind of a habit of like sort of jokingly referring to just television that I really, really love as cinema, like the
you're
OC.
Referring to pretentious twaddle.
Yeah, exactly. The you know, like the OC and the Sopranos, to me that has something else that like television doesn't have, because I feel like a lot of like the language of television almost, I don't know, has more connection to like, at least historically, like to theater and whatever and blah blah blah. I don't know. I don't really know where I'm going.
Three-camera setup. Lately there's been this conflation. Like we have this idea of prestige television, and used to you could kind of tell TV apart from cinema. It's just like production value, because
looks, yeah.
Because like a television show, you've got the 3-camera setup. They're all going at the same time, and when they put it together, that's what they're working with. And you know, a film production, it's camera setups and like elaborate sets built and not reused every episode or whatever. But now, you know, like with True Detective, it's like all this location shooting, and each
right
episode has been like extensively production designed. But I still think there's this difference in like formal structure is really what it's going or coming down to for me. I'm just going to say it here. I just finished reading Walter Murch's In the Blink of an Eye, which is about editing. He's and near the end he writes, television is a look at medium, while cinema is a look into medium, which he means when people are kind of editing a television show, they're considering how the audience is going to be consuming it. So the way they structure even just like the shots and the cuts are much quicker, because they're competing with like extraneous visual information, because you're watching it on a TV at your house. And cinema, like, cuts will take longer, and his point was that when you're editing, you have to consider how a movie is going to be consumed, and like the audiences will have way more of an opportunity to look into the screen and be drawn in. And I actually thought about that a lot with Twin Peaks: The Return, because it does have these very long scenes that would not fly on television, like primetime. I mean, they did somehow.
It still blows my mind that episode 8 of The Return played on like families' home televisions.
But
sure.
You feel what I mean about this pacing difference.
Yeah.
And even just like the way visual information is fed to you.
Well,
And I
also
feel
think
like we
it's-
pick up on that as audience members, even if it's not something that we would know intuitively, like as editors.
But we do know that there's tons of movies that do spoon feed you the visual information as opposed to allow you to invite you to look into them. You know, like we are thinking about cinema in this conversation as our idea of the ideal of what perfect cinema is, that like really challenges you and really allows you to get immersed into the world. But you know, a lot of cinema is like The Hitman's Bodyguard or some bullshit like that, you know?
I kind of want to see it, honestly.
So there's tons of, I mean, if we're just talking about quality and craft and tone and pacing, there's tons of cinema that doesn't necessarily qualify for those criteria, right? But Nathan, you're about to say something. Sorry.
Well, I think it's... I mean, I think all my answers that I give are going to come down to like some cop-outs, wishy-washy, oh, I don't know how to answer this question type of thing. But it's something where it's like, even though there has always been this porous boundary between cinema and other medium, I mean, something I actually learned yesterday in a class that I'm taking about film history from 1930 to 1960 is that, you know, there's this kind of narrative that gets told about how in the 40s and 50s, when television was really starting to take off, that Hollywood was really scared and, you know, introduced 3D and all these new things to try to get people back to the theaters, which maybe in some sense was true, but actually that a lot of the initial investors in television were the Hollywood studios, and the only reason why they stopped is because of the antitrust legislation in the late 40s that forced them to sell off their movie theaters, and that if that hadn't happened, that a lot of the early television stations would have been owned by movie theaters. I mean, obviously, that's become complicated now. I mean, Disney owns ABC and ESPN and the History Channel and blah, 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 and a lot of, you know, Sony and Columbia produced TV shows and all that stuff. But it's like, even an earlier time when there was a still porous boundary, I feel like television was always something that, except for in its very early years when people didn't really own TVs. There's a really great book I read recently called Ambient Television that's all about television and public spaces. And I actually didn't even realize that, like, prior to television's popularity in homes, that it was really popular in bars and in other public places. And so people would go and they would watch sporting events on a really tiny TV on a shelf in a bar or whatever. I didn't even realize that it was kind of popular before it was in people's homes. But once it became something really widespread, it was always more of a medium that you could control. Even if the channels and the programming were limited, you could turn it off, you could change the channel, whatever. Whereas cinema was something that was almost like inflicted upon you. It's like when it was in the theater, I mean, your attention could drift, you could talk, you could go to the bathroom, but you couldn't stop it, you couldn't turn it off. Once it goes, it goes. And like, obviously, I mean, home video apparati like the remote control,
Right.
whatever, have fundamentally changed that. So it's like, I don't know. I don't know. Zach, I want to know, I kind of want to know, like, you haven't really said anything. I want to know what your feeling is.
About what?
Just this whole conversation.
The pretentious
I don't know,
twaddle we're in the middle of, Zach.
what your feeling is, and
You seemed really into. I mean, I don't know. It was happening. I was just kind of letting it do.
I'm
its
sorry
thing.
if I just stopped it, but I just, I
Ambient
don't know.
podcast.
I did want to hear. Your feeling about it.
I don't know. I think most of the time, I think it kind of comes down to that the way that you described it earlier, where it's like a joke. Or cinema's like a, you refer to TV shows like The OC and I forgot the other example you got as a joke.
The Sopranos.
The Sopranos as cinema. I feel like I don't know, with if TV in its state eclipses what we associate television with than it's cinema, because for the last few weeks we've had a lot of, this to steal a phrase from Mr. Allen, pretentious twaddle about Twin Peaks: The Return or third season or whatever the fuck it's called.
I would like to clarify for listeners that Zach is the only one of these 4 podcasters who has not watched Twin Peaks: The Return, and therefore to him it feels like pretentious twaddle.
Or any day,
right?
You still haven't seen it.
The point I'm making is that
You're just being very dismissive is all.
I mean, it's like it seems to be, you have to like clamor for some way to define it. It's cinema because it for some reason can't be television. It can be television, and I don't know why it has to be cinema. I don't know why either of them. I don't know why one's ranked higher than the other. It kind of just seems like that. It seems like the old book. Is it a book or is it a play or is it a symphony? A symphony. It seems like there's always something that's higher in whatever than something else. I think that Lydia's quote from Walter, what was his last name? Murch. Is fine, but as you mentioned earlier in our text conversation, that was in 1999. I think that television has drastically changed from 1999 to 2017.
Well, that's why I talked. There's been a conflation,
exactly,
right?
And we had an episode about this very early on. Like in our first 10 episodes of the show, we talked about, I think we called it quote unquote cinematic television. Like, what are your thoughts on TV shows that are produced with the same level of quality as movies? But at that point, we were not considering, are there any TV shows that maybe could be considered movies in and of themselves? So Zach, you would still say you're at that original place of like, if it's on TV, it's a TV show, the end.
Well, the issue that I'm trying to get at is that I don't understand why we have to define something on television as cinema because that elevates it from. I don't know why we're elevating it. I don't understand why. I don't understand why we can't.
Yeah, I was.
Yeah, I don't understand why.
I think you were about to call us elitist.
Twin Peaks: The Return can't. I'm not. I'm not judging it because I haven't seen it and everybody's talking about it. I'm more just like, why are we trying to elevate? Why can't it just still be this television series on Showtime? I think that it can still have all of the merits that people have been talking about with it, and it can still. It still has the same you still have the same reaction to it if it's a television show or a movie. It seems like at the end of the day, this is more of just something. This is more of like a label issue rather than an actual problem hindering you from enjoying something. You can call OJ in America a TV show, a movie, a miniseries. Call it whatever the hell you want. It's a monumental work of art, and there's so many elements in it that just transcends whatever medium you want to associate it with. The same can be said for Twin Peaks: The Return. The same can be said for a lot of the other examples that we've made. But
we are still here on a podcast with the label of cinema in the title. So, when we put something,
it is
right. But
it's because we decided to talk about
Lemonade in our top 10. Like that was us making a decision of what we were going to call cinema. So I totally am sympathetic to your point, Zach, of like, really we should just be talking about art and like narrative art and whether or not we like a specific type of video narrative art. But we are also in the business. What's that?
Not video though.
What do you mean?
Not video though. I mean, I wouldn't use the word video since that's a really specific thing.
It's
just
a
like
format.
Art.
Yeah, I would just say like screen media,
moving
and not narrative either.
Like
since,
we are in the business of categorizing and giving out lists.
Yeah,
and
I would just say screen.
If we recommend something that, doesn't that kind of mean we're implying it's cinema in some way? Maybe this debate doesn't actually matter, like Zach is saying, but I do still think it is an interesting one.
Yeah, I mean, I did. as was pointed out in David's comment, I did recommend WrestleMania 17 on one episode. So
Did you really?
Yeah.
yeah, it was after the election. I recommended
gosh,
it as
yes,
like our
okay,
my
I remember
cathartic
that.
viewing. But yeah, no. It
One
just,
thing that okay,
real quick, I would just like I feel like it's kind of, and I mean I think I admit that there's a lot of even it's weird. I don't know why I watch a lot of TV. Actually, I mean definitely I watch more than Andrew and than you do, but I still like for some reason have some resistance to like being like I'm not a person who's like, oh,
Right.
I love TV, like I just watch TV. I don't know why. But I also it's like I don't know, it's
Yes,
kind of
it's
like
a political
comic book
term.
versus graphic novel. Like I hate the term graphic novel. It's just like so stupid to me. It's like just call it a comic book. But it's also sometimes it's like, and maybe this is true for me. I don't know if it's true for other people, but it's like I don't feel like I watch enough TV to make a list of the best TV shows of the year.
for sure. So you just want to
sometimes-
include it somehow.
Yeah, exactly. I just want to be like, let's put this on my list of things I watched this year that were good, that were really good, and I want to give it to people.
And I feel like that's the core of this whole discussion is the three of you want to include Twin Peaks: The Return onto your best of the movies list. And let me just be
You
the
are
person to
completely
say
correct.
nobody really gives a shit if you include it or not. Just include it. Like let me just add that to the three of you. Did Twin Peaks: The Return make an impact on you that you feel like it needs to be included in some ranking list of media this year?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then put it on the list. There we go.
So on our best of 2017 list for Cinematary at the end of the year, Twin Peaks: The Return can be on that list.
Is that?
Sure.
That's basically all we wanted. Like we didn't even need a 30-minute discussion.
We could have wrapped
could've
this
done
up
this off mic.
on a Facebook group, but I mean that's fine. I'm glad
But
we got.
I want to come back quickly to something that Nathan said, which is you mentioned that you definitely want to put yourself out there in the world as a guy who likes movies. You know, you're studying cinema in grad school, but you don't necessarily feel confident in saying, oh, I like TV, I watch a lot of TV. And I think that this is a thing that we talked about way back when we had an episode on Netflix. I think we've had a couple episodes on Netflix throughout the course of the show. And one day, Nathan, you made the point that a lot of people will talk about Netflix as if it is a thing to watch. Like the concept of Netflix and chill. I'm going to go home and watch Netflix. During my break at work, I watch Netflix. The focus is not on what you watched on Netflix. The focus is on watching the medium itself. And it does feel to me like people who watch TV often are more interested in the medium itself and just like having a new TV show to watch than like specific stories. Maybe I'm generalizing. Maybe I'm being like prejudiced against TV people right now. I don't know.
Well, I think you get to an interesting point where that used to be the case with movies. I mean, people would go to the movies constantly, and they wouldn't go to see a specific thing. Maybe they would know it was a Western. Maybe they would know that like Humphrey Bogart is in it or whatever, but they wouldn't really care about the director. They wouldn't really care what it was. They would just go as a social activity. And so I feel like maybe we've approached a point where it's like, even though a lot of people just will watch whatever TV shows are coming out and like they're like, oh, there's a new Netflix original series. I liked Orange is the New Black, so I'm going to watch the thing that Netflix makes. I almost wonder if maybe we're approaching a point where it's more like people don't just watch TV, they watch specific shows on TV and like online streaming formats. I mean, obviously Netflix is kind of still the king. I feel like that's maybe going to change at some point. But people now, Netflix is like, you know, I'm just watching Netflix. It doesn't really matter what it is specifically. The same thing is like I'm on the internet. You know, it doesn't really matter what you're looking at.
But though we are guilty of the same thing, like
so I wonder if maybe
fans, we have a podcast we talk about movies, not necessarily like we're devoted to a specific, I don't know, genre of movies or director or whatever. We are sort of doing the same thing. Lydia, what are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, it comes down for me like what I have time for to consume, because I can't listen to like just general pop culture podcasts because it's kind of like this omnivorous. I watch TV and these are comic books and this is video. Like that's too much media, and I'm a human being with other things to do. and I don't.
And that's sort of Zach's philosophy that he was proposing earlier. It's like, is this arc that moved you? Okay, then talk about it. What does it matter what label you put on it? But I do think for some of us, it does sort of matter what label you put on it, because to be perfectly honest, like, I haven't really watched TV regularly for about like 4 or 5 years, and I've probably had people recommend to me 100 TV shows in those 4 or 5 years that I do not have time for. Like, I do not have time in my life to sit down and watch 5 seasons of House of Cards or whatever, you know? So
I told you to watch that.
I have made a specific choice in my life that, like, TV is a low priority for me. It's too much of a time commitment, you know, whereas I can, and this hurts me for books too, because I was a literature major in college, and now I look at a book and I'm like, I could watch a lot of movies in the time that it takes me to read that book, you know? So it is a question of time management, like you say, Lydia.
But it's also a question of, well, like, efficient, not time management, but just like the structure. I honestly cannot watch TV. I'd mentioned the hook pull problem with Netflix, and Nathan, you talked about how a lot of in the industry, it's, are we going to get another season? Are we going to get another episode?
Yeah.
I cannot
it's
fucking
like
deal with a
self-perpetuating
narrative
cycle of incompletion. You want a sort of structural integrity to your art that doesn't necessarily always exist in TV.
And even
and does exist in Twin Peaks, which is why people are talking about it right now.
Yes. And even like True Detective or Fargo came out, this TV series, and like each season is its own contained thing. I don't have fucking time for like multiple, like way too similar, and then you still get involved in, we need to appeal to the audience every week, and then it always devolves into this just like fan service or very poor narrative choices, or again
it ends with a whimper, as T.S. Eliot would say, right? Like, at some point you just have to give up on the show. Like, I gave up on Mad Men like 2 seasons before the end, because I was just so tired of the tedium, routine, like, cycle of Mad Men. Whereas, you know, there's a really good tweet that I saw a month or so ago where somebody said the difference between TV and movies is I'm 30 minutes into a movie and I say, oh God, this is bad. And then I'm 6 hours into a TV show and I say, oh God, this is bad. You know, it's... And
that's why I'm not watching season 4 of Twin Peaks if it happens. Like, I'm done. I made my commitment. And I'm glad that I did, but no more.
All right. I don't really know where that conversation went. Any
Zach, thank you for humoring us.
Yeah,
I just want to say thanks.
Zach is just our parent. You're just
like,
our,
okay,
you're
wrap
just
it
our
up,
I
dad.
mean, it's again, it seemed like you just needed to like validate putting Twin Peaks on your list, and nobody really gives a shit. Like, just
I wasn't gonna tell you no.
It's
just an intellectual.
Anything final before we wrap up?
I can't wait for the best of the year episode where Zach like mumbles his way through our Twin Peaks: The Return entry on that top 10, because it's probably gonna be on there.
Also, I would like to say that one of the great auteurs of the 21st century is Josh Schwartz, and that the OC and Gossip Girl are undeniably cinema.
And also, if I am not able to log it on Letterboxd, then did I even watch Twin Peaks: The Return?
Yes. But like,
Probably
I can
not.
log the Big Little Lies, and I can't log The Return.
That's just it's. Let's wrap it up. That'll end this episode of Cinematary. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Cinematary, on Twitter at handle @Cinematary, and on Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/Cinematary, where you can see all the movies and not TV shows that we talked about in this episode. Next week, we're going to be doing another one-off subject. We don't really know what it is yet. It possibly will be.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
If people write in reviews of our reviews, we'll just read those.
That'd be good.
For the whole episode.
Yeah, but we'll have something. We'll make sure to tweet it out at the beginning of next week once we figured it out. But thank you guys for listening. We'll see you next week.